Richard often pondered the nature of the mistakes made throughout life. In moments of introspection, he questioned whether a mistake could be repaired or if every failure was a permanent stain on a man's soul. Married young to the woman who first captured his heart, he considered his marriage a true triumph against life's adversities. Together, they built a modest yet serene life. They lived in a small, cozy house, sufficient to shelter the love and laughter that filled its rooms. Their 2 children, diligent and curious creatures, were intensely dedicated to their studies, fueled by the dream of a bright future. Richard and his wife maintained 2 stable jobs that, although they did not make them rich, ensured the sustenance and financial stability of the family. Their friends, an extension of the family they chose, were always nearby, ready to share both the joys and burdens of everyday life. In his early 40s, Richard looked around and thought to himself, what more could a man want? However, despite this seemingly idyllic life, something was still missing, as Richard sometimes found himself involved in amorous escapades, a stark contrast to the facade of stability and contentment. These extramarital adventures, in his mind, were minor and inconsequential, mere fleeting slips that did not shake the foundation of his marriage. It's something natural, everyone knows that, he murmured to himself, trying to soothe the guilt that sometimes assailed him. In his view, women deeply understood men's tendency towards infidelity, though they opted for a facade of ignorance to maintain domestic harmony. They always know, he would comment in a confidential whisper during covert meetings with friends, who often responded with a nod of understanding or a complicit smile. And so, at the end of each adventure, Richard would return to his home, to his wife and children, where he reassumed without hesitation the role of a devoted husband and diligent father. He convinced himself that as long as the unwritten rules of his game were maintained, and the encounters were only sporadic and with professionals, his marriage would remain safe, immune to the storms he secretly feared. That unusual afternoon, after laughing and sharing stories with friends at a local bar, Richard felt a peculiar restlessness, a desire for adventure that led him down unfamiliar paths. Determined to seek the company of a woman, he had no idea that his destiny would cross with someone so striking. Upon entering a more secluded establishment, his eyes met Sarah's. She was a breathtaking vision, soft features reminiscent of an angel, brown eyes that seemed to embrace the mountains, and dark hair that fell like a dark cascade down her back. Instantly captivated, Richard felt an immediate and deep connection. May I invite you for a coffee? I'd like to learn more about you, Richard asked, feeling an uncontrollable urge to spend more time by her side. Sarah, surprised but interested, accepted with a charming smile. Time flew, and Richard, without realizing it, found himself paying more to prolong those precious moments. The next morning, the image of Sarah dominated every one of Richard's thoughts. Struggling against his own discipline, he returned to the same place, hoping to see her again. I simply can't stay away from you, he confessed when he saw her, revealing the strength of his attraction. The second time they met was even more intense and revealing. Each subsequent encounter only reinforced the bond forming between them. Richard, now completely in love, realized he was facing something he had never experienced before, a relationship based not only on physical attraction but on a genuine emotional and intellectual connection. You understand me in a way no one else does, Sarah shared openly, while offering advice and support about Richard's challenges with his work and his concerns as a father. Your children are lucky to have you, she said sincerely, providing a compassionate gaze that transcended the physical. And so, what started as a simple search for company transformed into a deep and meaningful relationship. Richard and Sarah found not only love in each other but a partnership, a complicity that would change the course of their lives forever. As Richard and Sarah spent more time together, he learned about the layers of her life, each detail revealed adding depth to the image he had formed of her. Sarah shared her life stories with an openness that enchanted Richard. She spoke of her childhood, the challenges she faced, and the dreams she still harbored. I've always wanted to be someone who makes a difference, you know? Someone who leaves something good behind, she confided one starry night as they both shared a comfortable silence. Richard, in turn, absorbed every word, every gesture of hers, with a mix of admiration and concern. He knew that, although his heart was increasingly given to this new passion, he had responsibilities that he could not ignore. I need to be careful, he constantly thought, reminding himself of the family waiting for him at home. The balance between his double life became a heavier burden every day. He tried to keep the secret from his wife with the utmost caution, but the intensity of his feelings for Sarah made him waver at critical moments. I just wish I could be honest about everything, he vented to Sarah during a clandestine meeting. But I'm so afraid of losing everything I've built. One day, the consequences of his actions caught up with him unexpectedly. Sarah revealed she was pregnant and he couldn't believe it. How is it that you need me to explain how a woman gets pregnant? Is that it, Richard? Sarah spoke with a mix of incredulity and frustration coloring each word. Her gaze was a mix of surprise and disappointment, as if she couldn't believe that this conversation was actually happening. But Sarah, for the love of God, we couldn't have let this happen, this should never have happened. What now? Richard responded, the desperation evident in his voice as he ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that denoted his growing anxiety. I'm the one asking you, what now, for heaven's sake? You say you love me, so now it's time for you to prove it, Sarah retorted, staring directly at him, her arms crossed in a defiant gesture. The gravity of the situation seemed to weigh on every word, each syllable laden with immense weight. Of course I love you. Look at everything I do for you, everything I do to be close to you, but family, I've already told you, you know? Family is sacred, it's a blessing from God. I can't acknowledge this, child. Look here, look at me, stay calm, I will help financially, I will take on my responsibilities, but I can't give him my name, right? Richard tried to mediate the situation, his hands gesturing in a plea for understanding, trying to balance his voice between supplication and firmness, but failing to hide his fear of compromising his image as a family man. What are you thinking, Richard, that this is some kind of gold-digging scheme? Is that it? For God's sake, no. I don't want your money, I want my child to have a father. Sarah's voice rose, strong and clear, categorically rejecting Richard's offer. She stepped forward, reducing the distance between them, her expression that of someone defending not just a point of view, but an entire lifetime ahead with her child. Sarah's words reverberated in the space between them, making it clear that her demands transcended the material, touching on the essentials: presence, commitment, emotional responsibility. She was not just seeking financial support, she wanted a partner, a father for her child, someone who would truly be present and share the responsibilities of creating a life together. Richard was consumed by despair, thoughts swirling in his mind like a whirlwind. Despite his feelings for Sarah and the time they had spent together, he never imagined facing a situation like this. The revelation of the pregnancy had caught him off guard, and the idea of abandoning his family to take on this new commitment felt like a betrayal of everything he valued. When he confessed to Sarah that he could not acknowledge the baby, her reaction was visceral. She felt betrayed and abandoned. In an act of defiance, she chose the most inopportune day to confront him, during his son's birthday, at a family gathering that brought all his loved ones together for a barbecue at his home. Without warning, Sarah appeared at the door, raw emotion on her face as she invaded the party, interrupting the celebration with her explosive proclamation, "I'm pregnant with his child." The impact of her words was like a shockwave. Richard, caught off guard, felt his legs give way, nearly fainting, while his wife, taken by surprise and disgust, began to feel ill. The children looked on, confused, trying to understand the storm that had just erupted on their happy day. Even his mother, advanced in age, witnessed the scene with an expression of pure horror. "And now? This is it, Richard, if you were afraid to tell, I've already done it for you," Sarah declared, her voice laden with a mix of challenge and pain. "Look, Sarah, for the love of God, you've already caused enough trouble here, go home," Richard pleaded, the panic evident in his voice as he looked around, seeing the impact of his actions on the faces of his family. Only when you say that you will register our child, understand?" Sarah responded, firm and unyielding, her challenging posture contrasting with the vulnerability in her eyes. Please, Sarah, look here, it's my son's birthday," he tried again, his voice breaking under the weight of the situation. "And here inside is also your son, Richard." Sarah interjected, her voice firm, refusing to be ignored or minimized. For the love of God, I'm asking, for the love of God, we can talk later, go away for the love of God," Richard continued, his hands trembling as he spoke. "I'm not leaving, I won't go," as Sarah concluded, her determination clear. She was resolute, ready to fight for what she considered fair, regardless of the devastating consequences that this truth would bring to all of them. After managing, with effort, to persuade Sarah to leave the party, Richard faced the difficult task of confronting his family, whose looks of disappointment and confusion weighed heavily on him. His older brother, always the most direct, crossed his arms and looked at Richard with a mix of irritation and disappointment. Richard, how could you be so irresponsible? The whole family is suffering because of your choices. Did you think about the consequences before acting like this? The accusation was harsh, and each word seemed to weigh even heavier on Richard's heart. On the other side of the room, his mother, a lady with silver hair and eyes that had seen many sorrows, held a handkerchief, lightly touching it to her tear-stained eyes. My son, I always taught you to value family above everything. What happened to the values we passed on to you? Her voice was soft, but it carried a deep sadness that only a mother could feel as she watched her home crumble. His wife, her face marked by anguish, sat next to him in tense silence, her hand trembling slightly as she spoke. The only way I can think of forgiving you, Richard, is if you cut all contact with Sarah and the baby, she declared, with a firmness that contrasted with her choked voice. And, honestly, I doubt that child is even yours. Her words were sharp, cutting through the silence between them. In the heat of the moment, Richard just agreed. Yes, I understand, he said quickly, almost without thinking. He was desperate to remedy the situation, to find some way back to the normality that his family had lost. However, in the still of the next night, a restlessness took hold of him. Initially, he thought it was guilt, fueled by the belief that family should always come first. But as the night progressed, a deep sadness began to set in, a sadness for having chosen the safety of his family life over following his heart. This sadness grew until he could no longer ignore it. He recognized that he was in love with Sarah, in a way that he couldn't simply turn off or ignore. I can't turn my back on her, nor on a baby that is also mine, Richard murmured to himself, feeling the weight of each word. It was a matter of conscience, he knew it would not be right to abandon them. Sometime later, when he met Sarah again, he was determined to face his responsibilities. Sarah, what are you doing here, Richard? Haven't you already made your choice? Didn't you say you didn't want anything to do with us? She confronted him, her voice trembling mixed with the pain of rejection. Calm down, Sarah, calm down. Richard tried to ease the tension, the sincerity in his voice trying to break through the barriers that had formed between them. Don't come with those handouts, we don't need that, you understand? She firmly rejected, her wounded pride clear in her defiant expression. I'm here to talk, Sarah, to talk and say that I chose wrong, Richard admitted, each word laden with immense weight. If you allow it, I've come to stay. I've left my wife, he revealed, bracing himself for the consequences of this confession. I can't believe it, Sarah murmured, surprise and skepticism intertwined in her reaction. Well, I've decided. And if you ask me if I was sure about my choice, I would say no. In fact, I was very afraid of making a mistake, of regretting it later, but at that moment I decided to listen to my heart, you know? Richard explained, a mix of resolution and vulnerability marking his face as he awaited Sarah's response, knowing he had made the choice his heart demanded. Richard, taken by a firm resolution, felt confident that he was on the right path in choosing to be with Sarah, despite foreseeing the difficulties this decision would entail. However, he could not have predicted how arduous this path would be. His decision to leave his wife and commit to Sarah and the child they were expecting together caused tremendous turmoil in his personal life. His ex-wife's reaction was bitterly sharp. Feeling deeply betrayed, she did not hesitate to use all her influence to paint Richard as a deserter, a man who abandoned his family on a whim. She talked with the children, sowing distrust and resentment against their father. Your father chose another life, away from us, she would say, manipulating their perception. Each attempt by Richard to reconnect with his children was met with coldness and rejection. When he tried to explain his position, he only encountered closed doors and looks that overflowed with disappointment and coldness. Please try to understand. I still love you, he pleaded, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears, increasing the burden of his pain. On the social side, the situation was no less brutal. Friends who once shared laughs and good times now turned their faces away as he passed, murmuring cutting remarks. At parties and casual gatherings, he heard venomous whispers. He's dating a call girl, saying he's going to acknowledge her child, doesn't even know if the child is his, you're being a fool, man, they would say, each word filling the air like poison. The accusations were both a judgment and a sentence, isolating him even further. Nobody understands Sarah. They don't see it the way I see it, Richard confessed to Sarah in moments of vulnerability, his face marked by the pain of others' words. They don't know you like I do. It was true that the words were cutting, but paradoxically, they served as a catalyst for Richard to further strengthen his feelings for Sarah. Each malicious comment, each prejudiced judgment only reinforced his commitment. They are talking about the mother of my child, Richard muttered, his indignation growing with each new insult. Facing this adversity only solidified his love and his determination to protect and provide for Sarah and the baby. I will do everything for you, everything, he promised, holding Sarah's hands, conveying through his grip the firmness of his dedication. And nothing they say or do can change what I feel for you. Richard and Sarah plunged headfirst into the new chapter of their lives, one filled with challenges and significant renewals. By deciding to live together, both committed to building a life that was not only shared but deeply rooted in love and mutual commitment. For Sarah, this meant making an important choice. She decided to leave her job, allowing herself to dedicate more time to the home they were creating together. This decision was not made lightly. In one of their intimate conversations, Sarah explained to Richard, I want to be here, not just physically, but with all my heart and attention. Our home, our family needs that now. Sarah's dedication transformed her into an even more constant and loving presence at home, providing Richard with the support he so needed amid the adversities they had faced. She became the rock on which Richard could lean, and their home quickly became a sanctuary of peace and love. The arrival of Pete brought an indescribable wave of happiness to the couple. Richard was ecstatic, and the moment he saw his son for the first time, a new sense of purpose and joy overwhelmed him. As he held Pete in his arms for the first time, he whispered, with tears in his eyes, "A welcome to the world, my little one." The nickname, a term of deep affection, became a symbol of the unconditional love Richard felt for his son. Sarah watched the scene, moved, and responded tenderly, "Look what we've made, Richard. He is perfect." Together, they marveled at the small life that was now part of their world. The transition to parenthood further strengthened the bond between Richard and Sarah, filling a space in their lives they didn't even know was empty. Richard, often moved by the transformation in his life, did not hide his gratitude. "You brought me back to life, Sarah. I wouldn't know what to do without you and Pete," he confessed, holding Sarah's hands during the quiet nights after the baby had fallen asleep. Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand back, and said, "We're in this together, always." Together, they faced the challenges of daily life, each small victory and each difficult moment, with the certainty that as long as they were together, they could face anything. Richard never forgot to express his gratitude and love, recognizing Sarah not just as his partner, but as the exceptional mother she had become and the vital force of their new family. However, Richard's happiness was often overshadowed by longing and regret regarding his other children, from whom he was distant. He reflected on his role as a father, aware of his past failures, but also of his ongoing dedication. "I know I made mistakes, but I never stopped loving you," he thought, hoping that one day, his children might see his truth and forgive him. Richard did not hide this feeling from Sarah either. In one of their conversations, he shared, "Sarah, I would give anything to be closer to them, for them to understand why I made the choices I did. I want them to know that they will always be my children, and that I will always be here for them." Despite the challenges, Richard maintained the hope that, over time, his children might understand and perhaps forgive his actions. He was determined to be the best father possible for Pete, striving to provide his son with all the attention and love he deserved, reflecting the desire to compensate and do the same for his other children, if he were allowed. Richard understood that each day beside Sarah and Pete was a chance to build a life of love and care that he hoped one day to share with all his children. "They deserve all my love, and I will do everything within my power to show it," he promised, both to himself and to Sarah, who supported him at every step of this difficult but loving path.